There's something about rivers. They flow silent, patient, swallowing everything. They're given memories, sins, and sometimes bodies. And when they decide to speak, they do it with the kind of truth that leaves towns gasping. Rosedale, Mississippi, the kind of town where people wave at strangers, and the biggest headline is usually about a lost dog or a record-breaking catfish. But that quiet was broken on a humid Thursday morning in July when Joseph McKinney, 64, lifelong fisherman, widower, and morning coffee regular at Millie's Diner, pulled something out of the Mississippi that made him drop his net and forget how to breathe. He'd left the house just after sunrise, as he always did, with the mist still hanging like gauze over the water. The old man loved that hour, the silence, the way the river smelled like mud and memory. He rode out to his usual spot under the cypress trees, about a quarter-mile east of the levee wall. It was there his net snagged on something heavy. At first he thought it was driftwood, maybe a sunken tire or a snapped log from one of the storms. But when he leaned over and tugged with both arms, something bobbed up. A plastic tarp, loosely knotted, swollen with water. And something else, a child's bare foot, pale as milk, poking out from a ripped seam. He didn't scream. Joseph hadn't screamed since Vietnam. But he dropped the rope like it burned and called 911 with shaking fingers, whispering, "There's a body in the river," as if saying it too loud would wake the thing up. By 7:22 a.m., the Rosedale Police Department had taped off the riverbank, and the first responders were hauling the waterlogged bundle to shore. The press hadn't arrived yet, but word spread like blood in bathwater. Locals came to watch, to murmur, to wonder. Sheriff Linda Capps, a stocky woman with ice-gray eyes and no time for nonsense, was the first to look inside the tarp. She didn't flinch. She was known for her steel spine, but she did look away for a breath too long. What she saw wasn't just a corpse. It was a child, maybe 10 or 11, with wrists and ankles zip-tied, a stitched Y incision down its belly, and the hollowness of someone who'd been emptied. The coroner would later confirm it. No liver, no kidneys, no eyes. The river, as it turned out, had more to say. By noon, 2 more bags had surfaced, one near the levee's south bend, the other caught in a drift under the old steel bridge. In all, 6 bags were pulled out of the water before the sun dipped behind the pine trees. 6 children, all with similar mutilations, all stripped of identity. That evening, as the last body was tagged and sent to the state morgue in Jackson, Sheriff Capps stood at the river's edge, sweat glistening on her brow despite the cooling air. She lit a cigarette she'd given up 3 years ago and muttered to no one in particular, "This ain't local." She was right. The next morning, 3 black SUVs bearing federal plates arrived quietly in Rosedale. Out stepped FBI Special Agent Thomas Granger, tall, lean, and sunburned from a life chasing shadows across the country. He didn't shake hands or make introductions. He only said one thing: "Get me everything you've got, and keep the press out of this." In towns like Rosedale, secrets don't stay buried for long. But some secrets, it seemed, were buried deep-weighted with intention, zipped in plastic and carried by the current. And now, the river had returned them. Special Agent Thomas Granger stood in the makeshift command center inside the old Rosedale firehouse, now buzzing with laptops, crime scene boards, and the low hum of exhausted federal agents. He scanned the wall covered in photos of the 6 victims, faces blurred, bodies charted, incisions marked with red pins. Each child had been found in a different section of the river. Each had identical injuries. Each was missing the same organs. He tapped a finger on one of the photos. "This is procurement," he said flatly. "Not murder for rage, not random. This is a system." Forensic reports arrived fast. The children, aged between 9 and 12, had been dead for less than 48 hours before recovery. The precision of the surgical cuts ruled out amateur work. It was clean, sterile, clinical. Dr. Eunice Rollins, the FBI's consulting forensic pathologist, confirmed what Granger already feared. The organs weren't just removed, they were harvested, preserved. These kids weren't dumped, they were discarded, like waste. More disturbing was the finding of micro-sized RFID implants embedded behind the left ears of 2 of the victims. The devices weren't standard trackers, they were military-grade, with encrypted serials. Granger stared at the x-rays. "This is black market, possibly government adjacent. The sheriff's department submitted recent missing persons files, and within hours, 5 of the 6 victims were tentatively matched to reports filed over the past 6 months across Mississippi and Arkansas. But the 6th? Nothing. No school ID, no missing report, no trace. That girl, Jane Doe number 6, was different. Her fingernails were clean, her hair recently trimmed, no bruises, no neglect. The forensic team suspected she had been kept in controlled conditions. Fed, groomed, cared for. Granger's gut twisted. She wasn't abducted, she was raised. In one of the sealed bags, they found something else, an object too ordinary to belong in a crime scene. A plastic bracelet, purple, with a name etched in faded white letters, Nina. Analysts ran the name through local school systems. One pinged in Tallahatchie County, Nina Hopkins, withdrawn from 3rd grade 5 months ago. Official reason: relocation out of state. But the school file noted something odd. Her mother, Patricia Hopkins, had signed the withdrawal form with an X. Patricia was illiterate. Granger sent a team to the Hopkins residence. The trailer was abandoned, mail stacked, no signs of violence, just silence, like someone had left in the middle of a thought. That night, Agent Granger stood outside, staring at the field behind the trailer, bathed in moonlight and mosquitoes. He could feel it, that cold ripple in his blood. This wasn't about one town. It wasn't even about one state. It was a network. And they just yanked the first thread. It was just after midnight when the call came through. The voice on the FBI tip line was young, frightened, barely above a whisper. "She's not dead," it said. "Nina's not dead. They moved her. I saw it." Agent Thomas Granger, still awake reviewing autopsy notes, froze when the call was routed to his desk. He pressed the recorder. "Who is this? Where are you now?" But the line clicked off. Silence. The number traced to a payphone outside a gas station in Clarksdale, 30 miles north of Rosedale. Security footage showed nothing but a blurred figure, possibly a child, wearing a hooded sweatshirt and sneakers 2 sizes too big, darting into the darkness moments after the call. Granger arrived on site before dawn. The gas station clerk had seen no one. "I just restocked the coffee and mind my business," he said. Near the phone booth, in a dented trash can, they found a folded page from a school notebook. The paper was torn, rain damp, the ink bleeding slightly. Written in shaky red marker were 5 chilling words. "They take us at night." Granger's hands clenched as he read it. The phrase rang familiar, nearly identical to graffiti found in a child trafficking bust back in El Paso in 2018. That case had gone cold after the prime suspect was found burned alive in a warehouse fire. He knew one thing now. Whoever was behind this had done it before. Later that morning, a ranger patrolling Delta National Forest reported a hidden campsite deep in the woods, far from any official trail. When the FBI team arrived, they found signs of recent occupation: 2 children's sleeping bags, empty granola bar wrappers, a cracked flashlight, and a weather-stained picture book titled The Brave Bunny. But what stopped Granger cold was a Polaroid photo lying beneath the sleeping bag. It showed 3 children standing in front of a painted cinder block wall. Behind them was a crude mural of sunflowers under a blue sky. The children, 2 boys, 1 girl, wore faded hospital scrubs. The girl on the right had short cropped hair and wide, solemn eyes. It was Nina. The back of the photo had a timestamp. 9 days ago. Granger rushed the photo to the analysts. Satellite sweeps, local building registries, and county records turned up an abandoned facility 42 miles southeast. Horizon Pediatric Hospice, shut down in 2009 after budget cuts and multiple violations. No new ownership filed since. No activity on record, but satellite imagery showed fresh tire tracks on the gravel road leading up to the back entrance. Someone had been there recently. By 2 p.m., a tactical team deployed. The hospice was a decaying husk, overgrown with weeds and vines. Faded cartoon animals still lined the entrance walls. The air inside was thick with mildew, silence, and ghosts of something far more sinister. Down a long hallway, behind a rusted, reinforced steel door, they found it. A makeshift operating room. Stainless steel tables, restraints, blood-stained IV tubing, medical-grade refrigeration units still humming, a high-end CCTV system, but all hard drives were missing. It was clear. This place hadn't been abandoned. It had been evacuated. In a narrow supply closet, wedged behind a crumbling wall panel, a final piece waited a child's drawing. Crayon lines on yellow construction paper, two stick figures holding hands, one with a ponytail, the other with a baseball cap. A black van loomed behind them. Above the figures, written in uneven block letters, "We ran." Granger held the drawing like it was glass. Nina was alive. Someone else had escaped with her, but that meant someone or something was hunting them. He turned to his team. "We're not chasing ghosts anymore," he said. "We're chasing a timeline, and we're already behind." They burned everything. By the time Agent Granger's team swept the facility a second time with dogs and a forensic drone, a fire had already gutted the rear wing. The structure collapsed inward overnight. Flames smothered only by the morning rain. A single accelerant-traced petroleum ether told them what they needed to know. It was professional, fast, deliberate. No fingerprints, no footprints, no bodies. The only thing left behind was a scorched scrap of paper that read, "We're done here." Granger stared at the message. It wasn't just taunting, it was logistical. These weren't criminals running scared. They were closing a chapter. By mid-morning, the analysis team flagged a critical anomaly. All 6 children found in the Mississippi had one thing in common besides organ removal: they were never officially reported missing. No Amber Alerts. No family inquiries. No school records past the 2nd grade. "Ghost kids," said Agent Ramirez, flipping through the compiled files. "Deliberately undocumented, like they were raised for it," Granger murmured, "like livestock." The room went quiet. Meanwhile, local law enforcement unearthed a new lead from a mechanic near Clarksdale. A white delivery van with no license plates had been parked in his back lot a week earlier, its transmission shot. The driver, male, early 32nd, wore surgical gloves, even while handing over cash. Paid in full, then vanished. The mechanic hadn't thought twice until he saw the photo of Nina. "That girl," he whispered. She was in the back seat, eyes like she wanted to scream but couldn't. The tip led to the county's warehouse district, where federal agents swarmed an abandoned meat-packing facility 2 blocks from the rail line. Inside, they found cages, 7 of them padlocked but empty. Animal grade, steel floors, soundproofed walls. A hidden trapdoor beneath a pile of rotting insulation opened to a subterranean tunnel, barely lit, leading 50 feet toward a storm drain outlet. At the end of the tunnel, scribbled in Sharpie on the concrete wall, "They watch us, even here." It was more than a message. It was a confession. Back at FBI Field Command, a digital trace finally hit. Nina's face had appeared in a dark web stream 2 weeks prior briefly. No sound, no identifiers, just a 23-second silent video of her in a chair, eyes wide, wrists bruised, with a white placard reading, "Lot number B-178. That wasn't a name. It was a price tag. Special Agent Granger knew then they weren't just harvesting organs. They were trafficking bodies in pieces, and in whole, auctioned in quiet corners of the internet, exchanged through crypto, delivered through corrupted courier networks. This wasn't a backwoods cult. This was a global pipeline. The press was breathing down their necks. Sheriff Capps held them off with a canned statement about unfolding federal operations. But rumors swirled. Parents locked their children indoors. School buses drove half empty. Someone even burned down the "Welcome to Rosedale" sign. Then came the call from Tallahatchie. A woman named Claire Bellman, former nurse at a private children's rehab center shuttered in 2015, said she recognized Nina from the news. "She was there," Claire said shakily, "but they told us she was mute, said she had trauma. They paid us to keep quiet, and when we started asking questions, the place shut down overnight." "Did she ever speak to you?" Granger asked. There was a long pause. Then, "Just once," she whispered. "They sell us." The line went dead. That night, Granger sat alone in the makeshift operations trailer, staring at the map. Red pins dotted Mississippi like open wounds, each one a location tied to a missing child with no file. He connected the threads, followed the back roads and waterways. The path wasn't random. It was a circuit. And at the center of it was someone funding, protecting, erasing. He circled the name on the board, Malcolm Varell, billionaire philanthropist, donor to orphan initiatives across 5 states, owner of multiple transport subsidiaries. Granger exhaled slowly. They were no longer hunting ghosts. They were about to confront men with names. Malcolm Varell had always been a name people said with reverence or fear. He wasn't the kind of billionaire who chased headlines. No viral speeches, no social media stunts. Just a crisp smile, a polished suit, and a habit of showing up at charity galas with orphans on either arm and a check already written. To the public, he was the golden spine of the South, funding children's hospitals, sponsoring scholarships, donating to clean water projects in states that barely had roads. But Granger had seen men like him before. Wealth like that wasn't clean. It was laundered through legacy. A subpoena wouldn't work, not with Varell's legal firewall and political friends. So they started quiet. First came the records. Varell's logistics company, Varell Transit Solutions, had hubs near every confirmed abduction site. His orphan foundations all reported missing children that were reassigned to partner programs that didn't exist on any government registry. The kicker? One of the old warehouses listed as a Varell-owned cold storage facility had been cleaned out 2 days before the raid on Horizon Hospice. It had a secret tunnel matching the specs of the one found in Clarksdale. "He's not just funding this," said Agent Ramirez. "He's managing it. But even monsters need to breathe in daylight." So Granger went to the gala. It was a black tie event in Baton Rouge, hosted by the Varell Family Trust. Marble floors, wine that cost more than government salaries, and politicians lining up like groupies. Malcolm stood beneath a chandelier, flanked by television cameras and a girl no older than 7 in a white silk dress, clutching a stuffed bear. He looked like royalty. And for a moment, Granger felt rage crawl into his chest like hot wire. They didn't approach him, not yet. Instead, they trailed one of Varell's logistics lieutenants, a man named Claude Rusk, who handled internal routing and was known to disappear for weeks at a time. Rusk slipped away from the gala early and drove alone, no driver, no security, into the marshland outskirts. They followed him for over an hour, until he pulled into an old boathouse marked "Private, Employees Only." Infrared drone footage caught him unlocking a trapdoor beneath the pier. Granger's team moved in silently. What they found below was colder than a morgue. Rows of refrigeration units, metal lockers with initials etched in permanent marker, coolers labeled in codes like Cone Leader LVR and B14K DNR. One locker still had a child's hoodie inside pink, with a patch of a unicorn sewn over a tear. Rusk tried to run. He didn't make it far. Under interrogation, he broke faster than expected. "You don't get it," he spat. "They're not just selling parts. They're making inventory disappear, permanent disappear. You think this ends with kids? You have no idea who he works with." Granger leaned in. "Try me." And Rusk whispered a name. A senator. Still in office. Still making laws about child protection. The air in the room shifted. Back at headquarters, Granger stared at the board, now filled with faces, children, operatives, donors, missing links. At the center, Varell's picture sat like a black hole. Then a new image came in satellite scan from an asset near the Arkansas border, a private airfield owned by a Varell shell company. That morning, 2 Gulfstream jets had departed within minutes of each other, with no flight plans filed. One of the flight crew leaked something anonymously. The manifest had no names, just codes. But one crew member took a photo. It showed the interior of the jet, and seated near the rear was a girl, dark hair, hospital bracelet, wrists covered with fresh gauze. Agent Granger enlarged the photo, adjusted the contrast. It was Nina, still alive, still in motion. He turned to the team. "Get me everything on that airfield. I want boots on the ground, drones in the air, and someone in Varell's shadow before he even knows we're coming." For the first time in weeks, the team moved like blood through a body, coordinated, fast, certain. They weren't chasing shadows anymore. They were closing in on the man behind the curtain. The jet landed in the middle of a thunderstorm. It touched down at a remote private airstrip just outside Flagstaff, Arizona, far from Varell's usual southern operations. Rain slicked the tarmac as the engines wound down, and two black SUVs waited in the shadows beyond the hangar. No insignias, no plates, just silence and headlights. Inside the jet, the girl didn't move. She sat upright, drugged but conscious, wrapped in a gray hospital blanket. Her wrists, bandaged clumsily, were zip-tied beneath. The bear from the gala, the same stuffed toy, lay by her feet, soaked with tears and something darker. They didn't call her Nina. They called her B-178. One of the handlers, a man with slick-back hair and gloves too tight for his fingers, nudged her. "Move," he said. She didn't. Outside, a satellite drone fed live footage to Granger's field command. From over 100 miles away, they watched the girl being lifted into one of the SUVs. Granger's team had missed intercepting the jet in Arkansas by 23 minutes. But now, they were close. Too close to wait for warrants. Granger made the call. "Move in, quiet and fast." 10 federal agents in tactical gear deployed from 2 unmarked choppers, landing half a mile out under cover of the storm. Rain pelted their visors. The desert clay turned to sludge under their boots. But they moved like phantoms, silent, exact, trained for nights like this. At 2:41 a.m., the SUVs pulled into the hangar. At 2:43, the first shot rang out. Agent Marlowe took down the driver with a clean dart, to the neck, non-lethal, but enough to crumple him like paper. The second handler went for his weapon and got a knee to the jaw before he could aim. Nina, still dazed, was scooped up by Agent Thomas himself, who whispered, "You're safe now. You're going home." But it wasn't over. Not even close. One of the SUVs had been a decoy. The second jet, the real target, was parked half a mile south in a concealed revetment. Infrared showed figures boarding: 3 men in suits, 1 woman in scrubs, and 2 large crates marked as medical relief equipment. The girl in scrubs wasn't Nina. It was another child. Unknown, unnamed, barely 10. They had more. Granger cursed under his breath. "We're not here for one rescue. We're here to burn this entire machine down." The team split. 5 agents remained with Nina, evacuating her to a medical transport waiting in Flagstaff. The rest, led by Granger, moved on foot toward the second jet. Lightning carved the sky into silver ribs. Thunder masked their footsteps. But as they approached, the plane engine started. They were running out of seconds. Granger didn't shout. He sprinted. He reached the wheel of the plane just as the stairs began to retract. He fired once clean into the engine intake. The turbine choked, screamed, and shut down in a shower of sparks. VI, nobody moves. The cabin door cracked open. A hand tossed out a badge, diplomatic credentials. One of the men on board stepped out, calm, hair perfectly parted. He smiled at Granger. "You're making a mistake, Agent." Granger didn't blink. "Then I'll make it again." They detained everyone on board, including the woman in scrubs who turned out to be a nurse from a children's shelter in Juarez. She refused to speak. Even after the cuffs clicked shut, she hummed a lullaby in Spanish under her breath, eyes blank. Inside the crates, they found sedation kits, IV bags, and 6 pairs of children's shoes. Each labeled by number. Nina's number B-178 was scribbled on the outside of one. It was never just about one route, one child, one state. It was infrastructure. By dawn, the operation had triggered diplomatic red flags. A federal judge was pressured to sign a suppression order. The media was sniffing around with drones and questions. Someone leaked the arrest photos. Granger knew the clock had started ticking on his case, his badge, maybe even his life. But he didn't care. That morning, he stood outside Nina's recovery tent. She was safe now, sleeping under morphine and the steady hum of machines. Her bear was clean. Her eyes were closed. For the first time in weeks, she looked like a child again. But somewhere out there, the system still churned. And Malcolm Varell hadn't even flinched. The photos leaked at dawn. Malcolm Varell stepping off his private jet in cuffs. A blurred image of a little girl, Nina, wrapped in a trauma blanket. The hangar scene, half lit by lightning, agents with rifles, children's shoes in numbered crates. And then, silence. The story vanished by noon. The cable news cycle pivoted to a senator's affair and a hurricane brewing in the Gulf. The social media posts were flagged as inaccurate or under investigation. The official FBI channels issued no statements. And the DOJ? Nothing but an internal memo stamped confidential. Granger watched it happen in real time from the basement of an undisclosed safe house near Phoenix. The screen flickered. The narrative was dying before it could even breathe. "They're suffocating the truth," Ramirez said, pacing behind him. "No," Granger replied. "They're cauterizing the wound before it bleeds too far." Because the real wound, the deep rot, wasn't Varel. It was the ones who stood behind him. In the 36 hours since the Flagstaff raid, 3 things had happened. The Senator Rusk had named Douglas Kane, longtime child welfare advocate, resigned, citing medical reasons. A federal prosecutor in Baton Rouge was found dead in her home. Suicide, they claimed. No note. 2 of Granger's best agents, Marlowe and Spence, were reassigned without warning. Administrative redeployment. The machine was shifting, trying to erase its own tracks. Granger knew they had to move faster than the cover-up, so he played his last card. He contacted Claire Meacham, a veteran investigative journalist who'd been fired from 3 networks for refusing to tone it down. They met in a back booth of a diner off I-40. Granger didn't offer files, he offered her one thing: access. "Interview Nina when she's ready, see the lockers, hear the tapes, and then burn it down," he said. Claire sipped her coffee, eyes razor sharp. "You'll be finished. You know that, right?" "I already am." She nodded. That night, while Claire began documenting Nina's story, Granger went dark. Not for safety, for strategy. He met with a retired intelligence operative, ex-CIA, known only as Barrow, who tracked trafficking networks from Moldova to Mozambique. Barrow spoke like gravel, moved like shadow, and had one rule: no names, no promises, just truth. "Varel's not a trafficker," Barrow said. "He's a facilitator, a cleaner. The blood never touches his clothes." Barrow pulled out a tablet. "You want the source? Follow the rail." The map showed U.S. rail infrastructure. Highlighted in red were 6 defunct cargo routes, all decommissioned, all supposedly inactive. But one had lit up just last week. A train departing from Louisiana's coast to a military surplus yard in Colorado. Unregistered, unreported. Its contents: 9 refrigeration containers. "They don't use trucks anymore. Too many cameras, too many checkpoints," Barrow muttered. "Rail's quiet. Nobody looks under the tracks." Granger felt his jaw tighten. It wasn't over. It wasn't even close. The rail map became their new battle plan. Meanwhile, Claire's first article dropped like a grenade. It didn't name Varel. Not yet. But it painted the picture. 6 mutilated children pulled from the Mississippi, a hospice turned holding site, a jet full of medical-grade sedatives, and a girl named Nina who remembered everything. The internet roared. Hashtags exploded. Number B178 trended in 3 countries. Then came the death threats. Claire was doxxed. Her car vandalized. Nina's recovery ward had to relocate under armed protection. They were drawing blood now from the real empire. And somewhere behind the curtains, Malcolm Varel, now out on bond, smiling for cameras, walked into a courthouse wearing a navy suit and a scarlet tie. He waved, smiled, said nothing, but Granger saw it for what it was: a warning. This man didn't fear justice. He'd bought too much of it already. And yet, just yet, there was one thing Varel hadn't paid for: Granger's silence. Not now. Not ever. He stared at the map of the rail line and whispered, "If they want to hide bodies in steel and smoke, then we'll light up the tracks." The hunt wasn't over. It was about to go off the rails. It rumbled through the desert like a ghost. No whistle, no lights. Just steel on steel, screeching across forgotten tracks under a moonless sky. The ghost train, Barrow had called it. 9 refrigerated cargo containers, no manifests, no crew list. It left once a month, always at night, always on the same line between Louisiana's dead ports and an abandoned military depot outside Pueblo, Colorado. And tonight Granger would stop it. He crouched beside a rusted signal post outside Tucumcari, New Mexico, night vision goggles fogged with sweat. Across from him, Ramirez checked her scope, focused on the southern bend. The rest of the team's 6 agents, all off books, waited with thermal scanners and EMF jammers ready. At 3:08 a.m., they felt it before they saw it. A deep vibration crawling through the bones of the desert. Then headlights dimmed and painted over, and the distant thunder of old iron forced back to life. The train was moving fast. Too fast. No scheduled stops, Ramirez muttered. They know. Doesn't matter, Granger said. We stop it anyway. They'd rigged a spike strip across a service bridge a mile up the line. When the train hit it, sparks erupted like fireworks, and the second engine derailed partially just enough to drag the rest to a screeching, staggering halt. What followed was chaos. The first agent to approach was hit by a sniper round clean through the vest. Granger dove into cover behind a gravel mound as bullets cut through the air like wasps. Whoever was guarding this train wasn't some hired goon. These were trained professionals. Ex-military, black budget. Return fire, keep it surgical, he barked. Ramirez clipped one shooter on the ridge, sending his body tumbling down the slope. Another was taken out by Barrow himself, who emerged from the shadows like a specter, knife first. When the gunfire stopped, 5 men lay dead. Granger didn't flinch. He approached the first container. It was locked with a biometric scanner, high-end, military grade. Too bad they had Barrow. The old operative pressed a gloved finger from one of the corpses to the pad. The lock clicked open. And then, the cold. Inside the container were beds. Dozens. Small. Metal-framed. Bolted to the floor. Each had restraints. Buckets. A camera mounted above. It wasn't a transport unit. It was a moving prison. They opened 3 more containers. 2 were empty, recently cleaned. 1 held sealed medical crates labeled in Cyrillic and Mandarin. The final container had occupants. 6 children. Alive. Barely. Hooked to IVs. Wrapped in foil blankets. Drugged beyond recognition. One girl, maybe 9, opened her eyes for a second and whispered, "Where's my brother?" They cut them loose. Fast. Careful. Quiet. Each child was lifted out, carried into the waiting evac van. Paramedics wept as they worked. And then Granger saw it. The 7th container had already been burned, blackened inside, ash and melted steel everywhere. A pile of name tags fused to the floor. Among them, the one that read, B-178, retired. Nina's number. Retired, Ramirez said bitterly. That's what they call it. Granger didn't respond. He just stared. Because in the far end of that burned-out shell, someone had left a message. Scratched into the wall with a spoon, shaky but clear, "We are still here." Barrow walked up, his face blank. "This isn't the end of the line. This is just one artery." "Then we follow the blood," Granger said. By sunrise, they had full federal custody of the children. No press, no leaks. The Pentagon issued a statement calling it a rogue medical logistics breach during a classified training exercise. No names, no photos. The empire was cauterizing again, but this time the wound was too wide. Claire Meacham published her second expose within 48 hours. It was fire. Eyewitness quotes. Satellite footage, medical analysis. The public didn't just wake up. They screamed. A Senate hearing was called. An Interpol task force joined the search for affiliates in Europe and Asia. And still Granger stared at the map. 6 routes. Only 1 had been touched. Somewhere out there, 5 more ghost trains ran beneath the radar, each packed with silence, pain, and numbers instead of names. Granger folded the map. The train tracks rusted over within a month. Nobody came to claim the containers. The federal paperwork got lost in some warehouse in Quantico. The children were placed into a special protection program, new names, new lives. And those who didn't make it, well, their graves sit under numbered stones on a hill in northern New Mexico, where no one visits but the wind. Granger never returned to Washington. He left his badge in a plain envelope at the Phoenix field office, with 2 words scribbled on the flap. Not done. He bought a cabin in Wyoming. 1 room. No Wi-Fi. From there he made calls, found allies who didn't answer to budgets or elections, former journalists, ethical hackers, trauma nurses, people who understood that sometimes you fight monsters not with guns, but with witnesses and memory. He still keeps Nina's drawing 3 stick figures under a bent tree, one of them smiling wide, holding hands with the others. It's pinned to a corkboard above a shortwave radio. Ramirez never stopped. She joined a private investigative group tracking missing children through border tunnels and dark net auctions. They found 15 more kids that year. Claire Meacham's final article won her a Pulitzer. She never got to hold the award. 3 weeks later, her apartment burned down under electrical failure. Granger knew better. They buried her next to her father in Vermont. Nina laid a white lily at the headstone and whispered, "Thank you for finding me." Malcolm Farrell? He vanished. His house was sold to a tech investor. His jet was repainted. His offshore accounts were drained in one night. Some say he's living in Macau. Others swear he's still pulling strings in D.C. through different faces, new names. But nobody sees him, because real villains don't disappear. They just become harder to name. And the ghost trains? 4 more were intercepted. 1 was empty. 2 held equipment and frozen organs. 1 had 11 children, barely alive. After that, the rail lines were shut down. Publicly, they were decommissioned due to national infrastructure modernization. Privately, burned, welded, sealed forever. But Granger knows what the river taught him. Some currents don't stop. They just go underground. Every month, he sits by the fire with his radio crackling, listening to the silence between the static. Sometimes, he hears crying. Sometimes, he hears breathing. Once, he swears he heard a voice whisper, "We're still here." And so, he waits, maps the noise, draws lines between the dark places on the globe. Because there's always another train, another name, another child whose silence screams for someone to listen. And as long as there's one more, Granger will be there. Not to finish the story, but to make sure it's never buried again. At its core, this story isn't just about a crime. It's about how evil doesn't always come wearing a mask or hiding in the dark. Sometimes it wears a suit, signs a check, shakes your hand, and funds a children's hospital. The most terrifying monsters are the ones who blend in those who twist systems meant for care into machinery for cruelty, and who rely on silence more than violence. The children in this story, Nina, the unnamed ones, the ones retired and never found, represent a harrowing truth that the most vulnerable are often the most invisible. They are failed not just by the criminals who harm them, but by the institutions too blind, too slow, or too complicit to protect them. But there's another side to the coin. Thomas Granger, Ramirez, Claire Meacham, these were not heroes because they had badges or press passes. They became heroes because they listened, because they refused to look away, even when they lost, even when they bled, even when the system shrugged. The lesson isn't just about exposing the darkness, it's about the cost of looking away. When people stop asking questions, when authorities sweep under the rug, when a child's disappearance becomes just another file, that is when monsters thrive. The story reminds us that justice is not a destination, but a pursuit. It's the decision to keep digging when you're told to stop. To chase ghosts others say aren't real. To hold space for the voiceless, even when their stories come wrapped in tarps and silence. It also shows that truth is a fragile, dangerous thing. It won't always get applause. Sometimes it gets you killed. But it is always, always worth telling. The river gave back what the world tried to bury. And in doing so, it handed us a mirror. The question is, when we look into it, do we flinch or do we face what stares back? Because monsters don't fear bullets or bars. They fear exposure. They fear people who care enough to never stop listening. And if just one person keeps listening, one agent, one journalist, one stranger with a map, then silence doesn't win.